The Last Refraction, an aging superhero known as the Prism, must face a final existential threat to the city as his powers begin to fail him, forcing a choice between his legacy and his survival. The morning light filtered through the blinds of Elias Thorne's cramped apartment, catching the dust motes that danced in the stale air. He sat in a threadbare recliner, his knuckles swollen with age and old injuries, clutching a lukewarm cup of coffee. In the corner of the room, behind a locked glass case, the silver and white weave of the prism suit shimmered with a dull, residual luminescence. It had been 3 years since he last wore it. He touched the jagged scar on his temple, a souvenir from the siege of New Ethel, and sighed. The radio crackled on the kitchen counter, news reports of strange gravitational anomalies near the city's core. Elias ignored it at first, but then the windows began to rattle with a low, unnatural hum that vibrated in his very marrow. He knew that sound. It wasn't thunder. It was the sound of reality tearing. Elias stood up, his knees popping with the protest of a man who had spent decades jumping off skyscrapers. He walked to the window and pulled the blinds. The sky over the downtown district was no longer blue. It was a swirling vortex of violet and obsidian, a bruise spreading across the heavens. People in the street below were abandoning their cars, running in a blind panic as street lamps bent toward the center of the anomaly. The radio announcer's voice rose to a frantic pitch, screaming about a figure emerging from the rift being made of absolute shadow. Elias turned back to the glass case. Not today, he whispered, his voice raspy from years of shouting commands over the roar of battle. He placed his hand on the biometric scanner. The glass hissed open, and the suit pulsed once, a heartbeat of pure white light responding to its master. The transformation was slower than it used to be. The suit, a masterpiece of crystalline technology, bonded to his skin, weaving through his pores to interface with his nervous system. Elias winced as the energy surged, a searing heat that usually felt like a second wind but now felt like a fever. He stepped onto his balcony, the silver fabric catching the dying sunlight. He concentrated, reaching for the photons in the air, bending them around his frame until he became a streak of brilliant, refracted color. With a sudden, forceful thrust, he took to the sky. The wind whipped against his visor, and for a fleeting moment, the pain in his joints vanished. He was the prism once more, a living rainbow cutting through the gloom of the approaching void. At the epicenter of the chaos, the figure known as the Umbra stood atop the ruins of the Grand Central Station. He was a silhouette of nothingness, a hole in the world that swallowed all light. As the prism descended, landing with a heavy thud on a cracked marble pillar, the Umbra turned. His eyes were twin pits of cold, dead stars. "You are late, Thorn," the villain projected, his voice a vibration felt in the teeth rather than heard in the ears. "The era of light is a flickering candle in a hurricane. I am the darkness that comes after the final breath." Elias didn't waste breath on a retort. He raised his hands, palms open, and summoned a concentrated beam of ultraviolet light. It struck the Umbra's chest, but instead of piercing him, the light seemed to drain into him, feeding the shadow. Elias felt a sharp pang in his chest. His light was flickering. He tried to intensify the output, but his powers wavered like a dying bulb. The Umbra laughed, a sound like grinding stone, and lashed out with a whip of pure gravity. Elias barely dodged, the force of the near miss shattering the pillar beneath him. He tumbled through the air, regaining his flight just before hitting the debris-strewn ground. "Your old prism," the Umbra mocked, descending slowly from the sky. "Your cells are tired. They can no longer hold the spectrum." Elias landed in a crouch, gasping for air. He could feel the suit straining, the crystalline fibers buzzing with a warning frequency. He was running out of energy, and the city was being pulled into the rift behind his enemy. The shadow reached out, and the world went dark. A dome of absolute nullity encased them, cutting off Elias from the sun and the city lights. In this vacuum, the prism was truly alone. He fired a flare, but it died inches from his fingertips. "This is where heroes go to be forgotten," the Umbra whispered, his form merging with the surrounding blackness. Elias closed his eyes. He stopped trying to fight the darkness and instead began to listen. He felt the minute vibrations of the air, the rhythmic pulse of the rift above, and the steady fading beat of his own heart. He realized he had been trying to overpower the void with raw strength, but light wasn't just power. It was information. It was the truth of things seen clearly. Elias reached deep into the core of the suit, past the batteries and the conduits, into the very essence of the crystal that powered him. He didn't ask for a blast. He asked for a resonance. He began to hum, a low frequency that matched the suit's vibration. Slowly, his body began to glow, not with the blinding flash of a weapon, but with a soft, steady warmth. The silver suit began to crack, shedding its outer layers like a shell. Beneath the armor, Elias himself was becoming translucent. I am not the source, he murmured to himself, his voice calm for the first time in years. I am the lens. The darkness around him began to shudder. The umbra recoiled, his shadow form flickering as if being struck by an invisible wind. The void couldn't swallow what it couldn't define. With a final, guttural cry, Elias threw his arms wide. He didn't fire a beam. He became a supernova. Every stored joule of energy, every memory of warmth, every spark of hope he had ever carried erupted from him in a perfect white sphere of illumination. The umbra screamed as the light pierced through his void, unraveling the gravity wells and stitching the rift shut. The darkness didn't just retreat. It was converted, turned back into the base elements of the universe. The shockwave shattered the clouds, revealing a sky so clear it looked like glass. For a moment, the entire city was bathed in a light so pure that every shadow vanished, and every person felt, if only for a second, completely and utterly whole. When the light faded, the streets were quiet. The rift was gone, and the sky had returned to a gentle twilight. On the roof of the Grand Central Station, there was no sign of the umbra, and no sign of the prism. Only Elias Thorne remained, dressed in the tattered remains of his civilian clothes, sitting on a ledge and watching the first stars appear. His hair was completely white now, and he felt a profound, peaceful emptiness. He looked at his hands. They were steady. A young woman, a reporter with a camera, climbed through the rubble and found him. Did you see him? She asked breathlessly. The prism? Where did he go? Elias smiled, a small, tired movement of the lips, and looked out over the city he had saved one last time. He's gone, Elias said softly, but the light is everywhere now. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more stories like this, make sure to like and subscribe. Until next time, stay super.